And there we go. Okay, now I shall share screen. Okay, cool. So this is what I wound up with at the end of the recording here. This is my little road trips site here. And I wound up doing both a quiz page and a contact page. Originally, I was thinking, well, this will just be a quiz. But then at the end of recording for Unit 12, I wound up throwing a contact page on there as well. So I decided, you know what, I better go ahead and do some jQuery for each of these. So the quiz here is just, take the quiz, and hopefully you've read the learning page. And if you did, then I'm going to go ahead and I don't have anything updating in the interface right now. So in order to see what's going on, I actually have to open up the console. So I'll do that here. And then I'll go ahead and take the quiz and see if anything pops up over here. So I'll say true and false are my three answers that I as the user think are correct. And I check those. And some things are spitting out here when I click on the submit button here. It's looping through each of these checked items here. So these three radio buttons that I've checked, there's a way to select for those in CSS, which is just a pseudo selector called :checked. And so it'll select for anything that has been checked. That goes for checkboxes as well as radio buttons. And anything you can select for, as far as I know, anything you can select for in CSS, you can select for in jQuery too. And then loop through them. So loop through them, and I pulled out the index number of each of these, just like an array that's, it's zero-based. So the first one is 0, the next one is 1, the next one is 2. These are the three values that I input here. I put in true, false, and false. And then these are the correct answers, true, false, and true. So we'll take a look at what's going on under the hood there in just a moment. For now, let's go to the contact page. And if I put my stuff in here, let's see, lbispo at scitech.edu, it's a comma, and I learned stuff. And then click on send. And it's looping through the values that I input here. This one I put in by default. I left this checked. You can just put a checked attribute right there on the checkbox if you want to. It's kind of a sneaky trick, right? If you want people to choose yes, make that the default. And then what I did is I took these values here and I stored them in a JavaScript object, which I think a couple of you said you've already taken the C++ class. Just to reiterate, objects in JavaScript are very different. In some ways, they're very much the same, but yeah. It's the inheritance thing is completely different. But anyway, the contact, true, email, blah, blah. So these are all the values that I put in. The first row or first column here is the property names. And those are taken from the name attribute, which you should recall if you spend any time actually building those forms, as you should have for today, then you know what I'm talking about. Every input or form control has to have a name and a value in order to be able to do anything with it. And so what I was able to do with jQuery is just grab the name attribute for these guys. So like this form here had name equals contact, or no, it didn't. This one had name equals fname, and then the value is what I typed in. So that's how you get those two pieces of information. So in this one, what you're doing is you're just selecting, these guys and measuring them against an array. And then for this one, you're actually storing, name and value pairs in an object. So let's take a quick look at the code that was used for that. Let's see, where am I? Here we go. So quiz first. And first thing is first is I got the script tag in here. So you need to do that before you do anything else, unless you're just writing something in pure JavaScript, in which case you do not need this link. Browsers know how to handle JavaScript just on its own. It's a runtime environment, and it knows how to process straight JavaScript. But jQuery is a particular library of JavaScript, and I need to source that in. You don't need to use a CDN for your own projects either. You can totally download the source code of jQuery and put it into your own subfolder, have a JS subfolder and put it in there. But normally I recommend using a CDN like this for a multitude of reasons. And then so the script elements need to go either at the bottom of the head element, or actually it needs to go somewhere in the head element. It's conventional to put it at the very end of the head element. Or if the script is not in the head element, it needs to be inside body. And again, conventionally, you put it right down at the body. So after the last content element is closed, this is the end page, and then I have another script element. So the script up here is to source in the library that I'm using, and then the script down here is to actually use it. Now, instead of putting the code inside the page here, we might have done something like script source equals, JS slash, interface.js or something like that. So we could take all the stuff that's inside the script tags here and instead put it into a separate file. And that's, again, what's normally recommended, but we're keeping things simple here and just putting it in line like so. So this guy right here is probably unnecessary, this generic function or anonymous function that you just put everything into. Basically, the whole point of this one is to just make sure that everything on the page is fully loaded before you run any of the script inside. Pretty much that's already guaranteed by just having the script tag at the bottom of the page. But if you want to just it's a way of reinforcing that. So without all the code inside, it just looks like this guy where you have the $sign and then inside you've got function and then the curly braces, and then whatever you want to happen goes inside those curly braces. That's what this guy's opening up. Now, there's an older version of this. I think I mentioned this in the recording, that you'll still see a lot out there, so I thought it was worthwhile to mention it. So the older method is document.ready function, and then you put all of your code that you want to do inside of here. So this is the old method of making sure that the page is completely loaded. This method still works, but it's deprecated. It's now recommended to simply do this, and personally I think that's a lot cleaner anyway. So that's what that guy means. So for the quiz, let me get back out here. Okay. So I stored the correct answers in an array. So if you're doing a quiz, you want to do the same thing. Whatever the correct answers for the 3 or more questions that you've got, just store them in an array here. This guy right here, so jQuery, by default, if you just do the $ in parentheses and then the selector in quotes here, what it does is it selects all of those items. So if I had multiple forms on the page, it would get an array of those, well, not an array, but something like an array of forms. And then if you just want one of them, this is a technique that you can use. You can also do this. It works the same way. So that's all that guy is. And then the important stuff happens down here. This whole thing is attaching a click event to the button. So that is, let's see, which page am I on anyway? This guy right here. So if I check, that's the event. That's the click event that's been attached to this button. And what it's doing here is this big conditional, this big if statement. And form.check validity, this is not jQuery, it's just straight old JavaScript. And what this does is say, do you have a valid form here? Let's say I refresh here and I leave one of these empty. And what that check validity does is allow this HTML5 validity or validation here. So please check one of these options, and then I click it and it goes away. The e.prevent default is preventing the form from submitting, because that's what forms do. When you submit them, they refresh the page, and that means that all the data that the user just entered goes away. So again, you don't need to remember exactly what these mean, but it's just a good thing to get into your forms right off the bat. So if you're building your form from scratch, wait, let me do that again. This is probably a good place to start. The button click method, or event rather, and then preventing the form from submitting with e.prevent default. If that's going to work, you need to have this e variable passed in here, and then put this prevent default inside this conditional. It checks for form validity. That's all. It's just a code snippet that you can use over and over again. And then so the action happens in here. I let all the users start off with a score of 0. The highest possible score is 3 because there's 3 questions. And this is where I loop through. This is all when the user clicks on the submit button, right? It only happens then. It loops through those 3 checked inputs with this selector here. And then basically if that answer that they input matches the corresponding answer in the array up here, then we added 1 to the score each time. So the most you get if you got all 3 right, it would once, 3 times over, it would keep adding 1 to the score, and you'd wind up with a score of 3. So I'm just trying to explain what this stuff done. If you're looking at this code and you're like getting the 1,000-yard stare and you're just like, I don't get any of this stuff, don't worry about it. Again, I'm just showing you the code. You can use it in your own work, and I'm just saying what this stuff does. And like I said, you can literally copy and paste this from the snippets that I put in the classroom stream. The contact page, it's very similar. Like if I kind of go back and forth between these 2 pages, you see a lot in common here. It's starting off with the big anonymous function here. It's starting off with an initial value. Instead of doing an array full of the correct answers, it's now just an empty object, which will be populating with the user inputted values. Just like here, we're using form equals form get 0, so we can put check validity on it. And then again, look at this, starting out from exactly the same place. A click event on the button, checking the form validity, and if it passes, then doing e.prevent default, which prevents the form from submitting. Now, just so everyone understands, if you are actually sending the data to the back end, like to another PHP page that's going to process it, this is the last thing you want in there. Do not do e.prevent default if you're actually sending data to another page, because this prevents it from doing that. But in this case, we're just keeping everything within the same page, so that's why we have that in there. The looping through is very much similar to this one, except that instead of looping through items that have been checked, it's grabbing all of the values from all the input and text area, and those are all of these guys up here. The text fields are inputs, the email field is an input. This is the text area where they can tell us what they learned, and then this is also an input here. By the way, here's that checked attribute that I use to check it by default. So just looping through those guys, and then there's where it grabs the name attribute, which is like name equals fname, name equals lname, name equals email, and so on. That is grabbing that here, and it's creating this attribute, or sorry, this property for the user info object, and then setting the value of that property to the value of the corresponding element, the corresponding input up there. And then this is where we're logging this to the console. So that's where we grab the object that was created, or here's where we grab the score that the user got from going through the test. So once again, I mean, that might mean something to you. It might not mean a whole lot to you. And if it doesn't, no worries. I'm going to give you guys as much lab time as possible today and tomorrow. In particular, I expect to have pretty much the full day of lab tomorrow, I think, for you to be working on getting this stuff into your projects and getting it working. Now, I'll just show you a little bit about getting this stuff into an interface. So instead of just logging it to the console the way we're doing, we can actually update the interface with this information. So I originally had a lot of stuff in mind for this, of course, but I managed to talk myself down from the ledge, as it were, and we'll just do something simpler with it. So this, let's say, let's see, where did I put this on my other version? Yeah, I put it right underneath the page name. So here I've got take the quiz, and then let's say, I guess I'll put it inside the header here. Let's say I've just got an H3, and I'm going to give it an ID equals response. I don't think I'm using that yet. This is to show, by the way, the extra credit that I'm offering. So for your projects, all you need to do is what I've done here and spit the value out to the console. If you're going with a bit of extra credit, then you can make it so that your interface gets updated a little bit by this information. So this is the quiz page. Let's go ahead and just do something. I mean, it's super simple. It's like an easy piece of extra credit for those who want to do it. I'm just going to use jQuery. I'm still going to keep it inside of this big conditional that's inside the click event here. And let me just make sure that's what I did before, yes. And so I can use jQuery to select for that H3 up there, like hash response. You might recognize this again. This is exactly how we would select for it in CSS, right? That's an ID selector. You do exactly the same thing in jQuery. You put it in quotes and parentheses and precede it with a $sign, and you could select for that element. As far as I know, jQuery was the first popular library that made use of this sort of thing, and it was really an inspired idea, for sure. Okay, so response, and then if we wanted to add some text to the response, then there it is in jQuery. And we can say something like, let's say we concatenate a few things together. Concatenate is where you use the plus sign. I know it seems like math, and you can use that for math in JavaScript too, but it's also for concatenating strings together. So this is why when you go over here, it doesn't just say the score that you got, but it gets score colon space 2. That's this concatenation here. Here's the score colon space, and then here's the actual score value here. So we'll do something similar here, something like you got space, and then we'll do the plus, and then put score, and then plus, and then like out of 3. Yeah, something like that. That's simple enough. So we're just saying concatenated string with a score value in the middle, which is whatever they got in the quiz, and then put that as the inner text, or not the text content of the response ID. So let's go ahead and try it now. I'm going to refresh here, and I'll put in the same answers, true, false, and false, and then check, and then we get the H3 popping up here. Yay, you got 2 out of 3. So some of the other stuff that I had planned for this was I was going to have the content of, when the user clicks submit, there was like a span inside each of these 3 field sets that either would show up green, hey, you got this right, or red, you say, oh, you didn't get this one right. And then up here, in addition to this, if you got anything less than 3, it would give you a link that says try again, and all the link would do would be to refresh the page by linking to the same page, ahref equals quiz.html. And so that's what I had in mind. But again, if you just get something updating with the interface, then you can pick up that extra credit. Let's go ahead and try that for contact as well. So I'll do the same thing. I'll go up here, we're here. I'm trying to keep these as similar to each other as possible. So I'll do the H3 ID equals response, just like the other one. Leave it empty. And then inside form.validity, check validity, we'll select for it using jQuery. There's the hash response. And again, I'm just asking that for extra credit that something be updated. So we'll do .text again. There's also like .html if you want to add like elements in there, like span elements or whatever. But so you do text, do another concatenated string, something like and then let's see. So I'm grabbing from the user info, and I know what the names are going to be, f name, l name. So if I want to grab the f name, the first name, I can use that. I can use user info dot f name. Let's see if I can type here. There we go. And okay, so just leave it at that. You could also do like user info dot email, like say, hey, we'll add user info dot email to our list or whatever. But again, let's just keep it super simple for right now. So just great, user info, blah, blah, thanks. Okay, so I save that and I go over here and refresh, and I'll go ahead and put in these values again. There's a way to like if you're in the constant development environment and you test forms over and over again, then you can input the values as value attributes to these directly, so you don't have to keep entering them over and over again every time you refresh the page to check something out again. But in this case, it's only a few things. And now when I click send, And now I get, great, Lou, thanks. And I picked up Lou from where I entered it here. Okay, so there it, well, it emptied this out, but there's that. You got 2 out of 3. And then here's this one, and it is, great, Lou, thanks, or whatever. So this part, again, the updating interface, that's going to be extra credit. All you really need to do is loop through the stuff and spit out the values over here. So I think that's enough for now. That's all we really need to talk about right now. A little later on, before we leave, because we've got about an hour left, we'll talk about the final exam coming up. Like we did for the midterm exam, tonight we'll just go over just very loosely what to expect on it. And then on, this is our next meeting, Thursday. Thursday, I'll have a more in-depth review of what's going to be on the test. And like the midterm exam, I'll probably go ahead and just give you all the answers, is what I basically did before. So this Friday will be the final submission of the project, where you are taking the forms page that you built and applying jQuery to it, looping through the form inputs and logging into the console. And then that'll be Friday, and then also on Friday we'll have the final exam. And I do believe that's it for now. Any questions about anything? About the jQuery especially? Anything pop in your head while you were watching, like, oh, hey, I wonder how you do that? Or, like, really, what did you do that for? That doesn't make any sense. Anything like that? All right, cool. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And this